Us to reconvene this work session of the Board of County Commissioners. Again, just for the record, we are moving up to item 3, which is the transit referendum initiative. After that item, we'll move to contract administration and review. Item number 4 will be deferred. The discussion of lobbyist ordinance will be deferred. And given the time on the procedural issues, what I'll do is defer that one as well. All of the assistants have a draft procedures manual. I just asked that I know they've already started looking through that, and if they can get comments back on that, on those procedures, just things like email proclamations, those kinds of things. We'll wrap that up when we reschedule a lot of these ordinances. Okay? So we're ready for the transit referendum. Mr. Administrator.
Chairman, the county attorney and I have met with the executive director and the special counsel for PSTA, or general counsel for PSTA. Our staffs have met to explore areas of finance, operations, planning, etc. As a result of those two meetings, we will be establishing an ongoing practice of meetings at those two levels to ensure the highest level of coordination and communication between county staff and PSTA. Today, we need to address elements of a referendum framework that have both legal and financial operational planning implications. And I think Jim will step us through some of this, and I'll chime in as appropriate.
Okay.
The memo you have in front of me details really the 6 issues that will provide us with guidance in preparing a draft language for your consideration. First, let me say I understand that the Thinking Times published some draft language. That was not ours. I'm not drafting any language. We get direction from the board. PSTA prepared some thought issues relative to language, and we've engaged with them on some of that. Before we get to the 6 issues, let me tell you that we've engaged the firm of Neighbors Giblin and the person of Steve Miller. Steve, if you'll say hi. Steve is working with us on a couple of preliminary issues, and one of the preliminary issues we had is whether or not the board, through the referendum, can bind future boards as to the use of this money, and the answer is yes, we can. There's a whole range of uses that are available, and we have resolved the issue that we can ratchet back the uses to a targeted approach if that's what the board wishes to do. So that preliminary legal constraint is out of the way. So just moving into the 6 items, each of these items, with the exception part of the last one, will be, or maybe 5 and 6, will be fed into the ordinance that we would adopt that would place the item on the ballot in November 14th. Our scheduling, let me just get a few preliminaries out of the way. We would, of course, in advance of the hearing on the ordinance, need to seek authority to advertise. There's 2 ways to go on this. One would be to come to you on November 19th for authority to advertise and try to get everything done by the 19th, so you have something to look at for a public hearing on the 10th of December. The other approach would be to come to you with for authority to advertise on the 10th of December for the hearing on January 15th, unless we schedule a different another hearing date. So that's what the calendar looks like. So if we get where we need to go by November 19th, then that would be a schedule, and we have a callback. So on to items 1 through 4. The levy can be up to 1% of put that in the referendum. There is a question that we are exploring about whether or not you can go up to 1% in the language itself. We'll explore that. But if the direction is simply from the board to 1%, we don't really have to worry about it. So there's the rate blank we need to fill in. Interrupt, feel free to ask questions.
Do each one as we go?
Well, we do have some public comments, so I wanted to let Jim and Bob go through these. See if we have any questions, and then take public comments and then go direction.
The commencement date of the levy is always on January 1st. The question is of what year. Your options would be for 2015 or 2016. PSTA has, I think, recommended 2016, so they will have made their decision not to levy tax. So you'll need to fill in on that. The obvious question is, if you wait till 2015, you would be foregoing the stream of revenue for 9 months. You would pick it up again. I believe PST's plan is to live off reserves for the first 3 months of fiscal year 16, and then tax will start coming in. So that is a blank you need to fill in. The term of the levy, it can be for a term of years or simply until the appeal. And you may need to make a decision on that. And then the question of uses. As I said, it appears that legally you have the ability to constrain through the referendum process, constrain the board as to what it would be spent on. If you give us that direction, we'll draft the question that way. And listed below number 4 are all the various uses that this penny can be spent on. The fifth item is really more of a how do you handle the money issue that could be addressed in the interlocal agreement. So let me back up. The 4 questions that you have there are 4 blanks that need to be filled in for the ordinance and for the title and ballot question. By the way, Dennis and Jewel are going to be working on this for me, and throw something if I say something wrong. The 5th item is really for the interlocal agreement. The question is, do you take in the money and we are passed through for all that money to PSTA, or do you somehow reserve some authority to time release of funds and things like that? I believe the PSTA's direction would be that we would serve or pass through directly to them. There is a question about, a legal question about whether they would have to come back to us to share it with anyone else. I think the discussion was that if we were to share it with anybody other than PSTA, if PSTA said we need to give it to some money to X, we need to put some money to Y, like give it to the city to do some stuff, or whatever, they would have to come back to us because we have the statutory authority to share these things. But we can work through that. But it's really a question of the flow of the funds. And finally, number 6, which is really Bob's primary concern, is if 100% of the surtax proceeds go to PSTA, does that mean PSTA is going to do 100% of the financial obligations related to the subject matter of the tax? If the county or the cities, for that matter, be responsible, then we each need to independently assess our financial sources of funds to fulfill those obligations.
Can you give me an example? The plan as Greenlight Mills as it stands has 1% allocated for bus expansion and light rail, all funded by that 1%. So what additional costs are we talking about?
Commissioner, that'd be things like utility relocation costs, right-of-way acquisition, if there were any real estate or Real estate transaction costs, could be condemnation issues. Traffic signal systems, joint use agreements, in land use and zoning differentiation, costs of appurtenances, whether those be stations or other related support systems for bus rapid transit or light rail. There's a few.
The best example that I can think of.
Engineering, consulting, planning that has not directly to do with the bus rapid transit or the light rail, but that is associated with the accommodation and effectiveness of the project.
The best example I can think of is that there is a financial feasibility report that is due. I've seen a PowerPoint associated with it, and one of the things that it says, according directly to Bob's issue of right-of-way utility location, is that financial report assumes what is called the FDOT model for utility relocation, which means that ESDA would not pay for that. The utilities would pay for that. I don't know what else is in or out of that financial feasibility study, but it would be appropriate to get the document as quickly as possible in the hands of our FA, so our financial advisors, so they can review that and give us the benefit of their review. But that's an outstanding example. It can get very expensive very quickly, and we would have to identify a funding source for that.
And we did ask for that the details of that financial plan delivered to us as soon as possible.
Sooner the better. Obviously, one of the issues is the receipt of state and federal funding in support of the rail. There are a host of things that can happen between now and the time we're ready, and the board need to address the issue of should you expand the use of lists to address contingencies, or should you be prepared to repeal it if we aren't going to need too much money? So that's the final item there.
Let me just clarify, because I know how things can be changed on YouTube and such. We have a detailed financial plan already developed. So what we're asking for is the details of the third-party independent review, which is being developed. And we do have that summary. We want the details underlying the assumptions of that follow-up. Okay.
So that's your list of issues.
All right. Commissioners, questions or comments on those items before we go to public comment? Commissioner Justice?
Thank you. On the subject number 3 on the repeal, is the repeal, because it's coming referendum, does it have to be a repeal referendum, or can the commission do that unilaterally?
The commission would do that unilaterally. You would be, in the question, you are asking for the authority not only to put it in place, but also to repeal it.
Thank you, Commissioner Justice. Commissioner Roach?
On the number 1, under rate, I'm just looking for a word clarification. BCC can levy up to A, 1% additional. It's a word issue. We're talking about the current taxing structure, which is 7 cents. If we add a cent to that, it's actually 14%. So are we talking about, it should be that the board can levy up to a 1% or a 1 cent? That's what I mean, it's percentage versus cent. Which one is the proper use in this, and what's being presented?
A 1%.
A 1%.
And what's the specific name for that? Is it transit surtax?
Transit surtax.
Anything else, Commissioner Roach?
No, at this point, thank you, sir.
Commissioner Moroni?
Thank you. Should that pass in November of 2014, being that they don't want the money to start coming in till January 1st of 2016, taxes are collected in November every year on most properties. So say in November of 2015, you have 1 month of December that would that homeowner be responsible for paying that tax that's currently on the books? Because this isn't going to go into effect until January 1st of 16.
Sales tax.
Oh, I'm sorry, that's right, I'm sorry. I'm sorry,
Tax confusion.
tax confusion, too much.
No, but I think your question's relevant, because when would the PSTA ad valorem tax cease?
Come on.
In November.
I think Brad knows going to walk us through that.
Okay.
But that's part of the thing.
Okay,
Okay,
thank you, thanks.
Any other questions at this point? If not, Gene, do we have any other cards? I've got 2 cards on
Yes, sir, just those two.
Okay. I will note that Harry Crozier, who's chair of the ACPT, was here all morning. My good friend Ronnie Duncan
Sarah?
moved over to the left.
Yes, I did.
Good to see you, Chairman of Ballot, and I know we have PPC staff and PO staff here today. Thank you all for being here, and PSTA staff as well. First speaker is Brad Miller from PSTA.
Good afternoon. I have a very, very brief PowerPoint presentation, which, although just got a copy of Mr. Bennett's memo, first slide sort of highlights the questions, at least having watched your video before, about basically goes down through that memo. And just for clarification, what PSTA, what the Green Light Plan has been talking about for a very long time is shown on this first slide. Question number 1, when? You were just talking about that. PSDA's financial plan and the Green Light Plan calls for it to kick in on January 1st, 2016. That's to allow for the PSDA board to zero out the property tax as of October 1 of 2015. And then that way, the property tax owners would never pay an ad valorem PSDA tax at the same time they were collecting the sales tax.
Okay.
So there would be the property tax would go away October 1, and like you said, Commissioner Maroney, people usually pay that property tax in November, right? But they would not pay, and PSDA would float on reserves until January 1, and our financial plan assumes that. That's the reason for January 1, 2016. If you decided to implement the sales tax on January 1 of 2015, about 2 months after the vote, PSDA would, folks would still be paying their last year of property tax in that same fiscal year. Second question, I don't think these are exactly in the same order of your memo, but how much 1%? The 1% revenue is required according to our financial plan that now has gone through a thorough review. Number 3, how long? Certainly, we recommend until repealed, because there would be no more ad valorem. So the property tax would go away, so this would be our funding source, not only for the capital, but for the ongoing operating and maintenance. And I think most of you have seen, and you can certainly have a copy of the financial plan, but over time, over the long haul, the operating and maintenance far exceeds the upfront capital costs. And so that's why the vote in the ballot language and the recommendation is for it to be permanent until repealed. The uses, again, there is a detailed Green Light Pinellas plan. And then, I don't think this was one of the questions, but the key for the interlocal agreement about eliminating the ad valorem, PSDA ad valorem, is at least the PSDA board's position at this point is yes, to eliminate the ad valorem property tax at the same time. Again, what is the Green Light Pinellas plan? As the county administrator discussed, we've had a number of meetings now to try to go into more detail. I know many of the commissioners, either through the MPO or through PSDA, are pretty familiar with what is included in the Green Light Pinellas plan. But it's very important that more and more people, including the county staff and the management team, learn to understand this. But it includes essentially the 3 things on this slide: a transformation in the countywide bus, implementation of passenger rail, and coordination of the land use for transit supportive development. I think you all know and mentioned that we have vetted these numbers and have a sustainable financial plan with these assumptions of assuming the sales tax kicks in on January 1 of 2016 and is permanent to cover operating and maintenance expenses over the long haul. Now, a lot of the questions that the county staff asked or detailed are very, very good questions, and I'm thankful that they asked them. But a lot of those questions get into the detailed design of some of our capital improvements, including the rail. And we have a phasing plan now put together that's part of this plan that as you can see on this slide, the rail planning doesn't really even start until 2018. So certainly the county in this discussion needs to keep going and be an ongoing dialogue. And we have some assumptions on trying to include as much as we can into our financial plan that we can be aware of. But these sort of questions, I think, as somebody said before, unknown unknowns, we may not get into some of these answers until design, several years out. Last but not least, just again, we are committed to working with the county over the long haul. Our Ernst & Young financial advisors call this a marathon, not a sprint, and that is what I think the county administrator and I are committed to doing. I had a meeting, we had a meeting with a number of the county staff, management team, a little bit lower level, and a lot of them were seeing their presentations that you all have seen, you get 10 times, for the first time. And so, and gave me 77 questions that we are committed to answering, or coming up with a process to answer those as we get the information. I think the most important thing to say, though, is when you're considering the ballot language to put before the voters and scheduling that vote for December 10th, 2013, is to be in the spirit of the Green Light Pinellas process, which we have worked very hard over the last 6 months to be transparent and direct and come up with a detailed plan on what the voters will be voting on when they vote. The state legislation that allows for the transportation and surtax is fairly broad. There's a lot of possible uses, as the attorney's memo notes, but we have identified a plan that is viable and try to just keeping with that spirit, because we certainly have had a lot of questions and a lot of public dialogue on this. Is to try to be as straightforward. I think you have a copy of the draft ballot language, and we're trying to be as simple and straightforward as we can with that. And I'll be here to hear what your comments are and to take questions. And we have our legal counsel, Alan Zimmett, and bond counsel with Alan's firm as well is here to be along for the process.
We'll come back to Brad and questions. Let's get the other speaker, Fred Keel. Good afternoon. Thank you for being here all day.
Yeah, thank you. It's really pretty short. I just wanted to ask that you make sure that the ballot, when the ballot is written, that it's very simple and straightforward, not one of these yes if you don't want it, no if you do want it, because that's done a lot, and it's confusing to a lot of people. I can read that. There are people out there that can't, and they vote. So
It's a great point.
I just wanted to bring that up as something for you to consider, because I think it's an important part of being good to the people and looking out for the people. And one other thing that bothered me happened the last time they had a vote for a penny sales tax is that it failed. In the very next ballot, it was put back on the ballot again, and it got passed. And I was really irritated because there was no mention of it that I saw any place until the very last minute that it was on the ballot.
Which penny are you referring to?
Penny for Pinellas tax, the first time it was put up.
I don't recall.
I recall it
The
distinctly.
first time?
Because I was irritated with the land.
Yeah, I thought it passed every time.
No, the first time it was put on the ballot, it did not pass.
The first
The
penny.
very next ballot was on it again. I would like to not see that happen. I think that's very good, whoever did that.
Thank you, sir. We weren't here,
Thank you.
but we appreciate it.
Right.
It was not Ronnie Dunn. Precedes Commissioner Dunn. Okay, commissioners, questions? Commissioner Roach.
Thank you. I just got a couple quick ones for Brad, if you don't have to, before we get into the deeper discussions of these, just on the analysis. The sustainable financial plan that you spoke of, does that include state and federal funding options?
It does, yes.
Okay. When we talk about eliminating the property tax, PSA property tax, are you suggesting via the special act?
Well, as you
That's the
know,
only way to eliminate it. I'm not talking about words here. Or are we talking about making it go dormant by virtue of an interlocal agreement?
I would say the latter.
Thank you. And then, do you have a copy of, or do we have a copy of the language that apparently the Times has in the paper?
Well, that
PSTA suggested language?
It came from PSTA.
Do we have a copy here?
Yeah.
Can we get
Are
copies?
we gonna be
We can
considering it
obvious
today?
if you don't have, yeah.
That and when you get a chance, could you forward a copy to myself, if not everyone, of the 70 questions staff put to you?
The 77 questions, yes.
Would you be so kind? I'd like to see those.
I can. Yes, I have it.
If you would just email that to
To everyone.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Roach.
Those were the questions that the county staff put.
Correct. We haven't seen it. I'd like to see it.
Okay.
Please, I.
We're working on answering them.
No, I'd just like to, thank you, Brad, appreciate your time.
Just answering one of the questions on repealing the tax, I think the answer is all the above. We talked about this at PSTA
Yeah.
last week, that the board itself, PSTA, will zero it out, and then also ask the legislature to bring back that legislation that would have killed it if the sales tax passed, which the governor passed the legislature, the governor vetoed it. Hopefully, the second time around, they'll have to say. Commissioner Justice.
Thank you. On the, I don't know how deep of conversation we're getting into today, but of the 77 questions that were presented and different things, that we're concerned that there's, you've got in your budget somewhere plans for land acquisition, right of way, those kind of things. Was there anything in those 77 questions that was like a red flag that popped up and said, oh, we hadn't thought about that, or that's something that we need to look more at than what we had thought about?
No, I think that as they mentioned, there were some broad questions. Did you include money for stations? Are you requiring the cities to implement TIF districts or things like that to fund stations and things like that? And the answer to all those kind of things is no. I mean, we have a detailed financial plan that covers, we believe, the standard sorts of capital and operating costs for the bus rapid transit and the bus improvements and the rail plan as they're designed at this level. There was the one question about utility relocations that came up, and the answer we got back from our engineers is they followed the FDOT, what FDOT does, requiring in large part, requiring the utility companies to relocate the utilities. But also that they specifically included some of the, in the real estate contingency, some funds they believe that can cover expenses for utility relocates. I think one of the other sort of interesting questions that did come up was what if, the plan calls for substantial land use changes around the stations, and so what if a major new development were to occur, say in Largo or somewhere along the line, and that new development would require a whole bunch of new utilities or new roads for that new development that we're trying to incentivize. And no, we haven't included those. We have not included, secondary development or infrastructure requirements that would be brought on by what we're trying to incentivize is this type of new development. So the county staff, I think, was right to question exactly what are the land use changes envisioned and how those are going to affect down the road. But those are the kind of issues that were brought up. But the base project is financed and maintained through the sales tax.
The other question I have, and I know you guys cringe when we start talking about stations, but let's talk about stations. In your budget, projecting what is a station? And is it a platform where there's a aluminum overhang, or is it a Grand Central station with development for other opportunities? And have you gotten to that point? And I mean, I read in the article in the Tribune that there is thoughts about what the different stations would be like, but I didn't know if that was in your plan.
Well, again, there are 16 proposed stations, so we have budgeted for, we've used some budget assumptions for all those elements that you're describing, and yes, you can build Grand Central stations or little platforms only, they've looked at all 16 stations. There's obviously different parameters in downtown St. Pete to, say, in the Gateway, Carillon area, and so there's not one set amount, but it's based on other transit systems and what they have paid for their stations. But the station also includes parking, sometimes even structured parking, access by bike and by road to the station, sidewalks. All of that is included in the budget plan, as well as just the basic platform.
I think the thought is that, and not as but that we've got enough money for a platform, but if you want, a nice station, we don't have that money. And we'd be coming back to either the board or to the city of Largo or wherever.
Commissioner Justice, do you have another thought?
It would, just in watching developments happen with private-public partnerships over my life,
It's a good question.
Commissioner Loveall?
I have always made this assumption, could be wrong, but assuming that the tax passes, that land around the stations is going to become very valuable. Developers are going to go in there and start developing it. I am assuming that they're going to want a partner. And if they're building an office complex with condos or apartments and retail, they're going to make some niceties. They're going to include some niceties. And there will be that kind of partnership as it evolves. If a particular station doesn't have any development by the time we get there and build it, we'll build a basic one, which can always be improved later. I don't think this is something that you can tie bow around at this point, but
I was just trying to get a feel for, out of the 16 stations, we thought, there'd be standard stations and then there would be 3 more or less. I mean, and I know we haven't got to, I just read in the article that there was some thoughts along the line, so I just was getting a feel for what is assumed and included or what shouldn't be assumed or included, so just.
and from my perspective, there's still a lot of unknowns that we won't know until the process starts moving after the tax is passed. And the world will change dramatically, I think. The real estate market will change. There's going to be a lot of activity around those areas. And then we'll see what partners come forward.
I think the Tampa Tribune article you're referring to was talking about the different stations about through the work we did with the MPO on the land use, and that yes, individual station development plans were designed around all 16 stations, and some of those were envisioned to have major development, and others were maybe more neighborhood, lesser development.
Which is exactly what we want. I mean,
Yes.
each individual community can shape their own station. I was going to put you on the spike, Mike Crawford, Executive Director of PPC. Just tell us a little bit about the station area development and how we've been working with the cities to develop those individual station plans.
Right, back in, Mike Crawford, when I was planning council, back in 2010, we anticipated light rail and supporting bus network, and we passed countywide rules, that talk about 4 different types of stations, types 1 through 4, the most intense being in St. Petersburg, for example, maybe downtown Clearwater. So we have regulations in place today. Now, on top of that, we're updating the countywide plan, and we're providing categories for that, places for those as well. So we've already gathered the rules, now we'll put it in the plan, it'll be an available category. It couples with the station design charrettes that the Enfield did with the PSDA. And also, there's a group that's been put together by Joe Strickland of the 5 communities that have rail lines that are planning to come through those. And they're working on consistent zoning regulations, zoning codes, comprehensive plan amendments for those 5 communities. And that helps with the Federal Transit Administration process as well. So I think that's all being blended pretty well, but a lot of that does go back to the design charrettes and what those stations would look like. And again, what we think, and those 4 types of different stations of different intensities, some would be neighborhood oriented, some would be downtown CP. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you so much. Commissioner Roach?
Don't take this wrong, but how do we square, we have a solid financial plan with, we're not sure what we're going to do until we get the money. Exactly. How does that happen? And if the solid financial plan, I assume, includes one type of station or another, not a maybe, doesn't, it's solid. It has, well, 15 base stations or something like that, I assume, and then the assumption is perhaps if it's larger, if I heard you right, then maybe developers will come in with a partnership and expand. Is that what you meant?
Yes.
Okay.
And not expand size per se,
Right.
but amenities. More benches, bigger overhang, potted plants.
We went over this in detail at the PSTA meeting last week. Commissioner didn't have a chance to attend that, but the financials are solid. They were solid when ACPT and the AA, I forget, the PAC put that together. And now it's been verified by third-party independent review. The financial plan is solid. And the transit-oriented development portion of this is key. We're already seeing it in Orlando where Sunwell was approved. You're already seeing it. So the development will come. We are setting the infrastructure, and it is a partnership with the private sector. And everywhere that this has gone in, the private sector investment has come. So that's an important part of the plan as well. I want to try to, on the 4 issues that we need for the referendum, see if we can check these off, just consensus. Commissioner Steele, you got a question first?
Well, it goes to
Okay.
the 4 questions. And when we, sitting on the ACPT, when we went through the financial plan, for the most part, it projected out 35 and then 50 years. But truly, for the bonding capacity, for the fixed skyway system, and the expanded bus system, you really need the full 1 for 35 years. But then after that, it was a better financial picture. So I myself would prefer to, if we're allowed to put it in the legal language, up to 1%, because it may come a point in 35 years that you don't need the full cent. And I think you need to do that by interlocal agreement and have it adjust if needed. The other piece that's not in here is, to my fellow county commissioners, with us putting the referendum on the ballot means we take responsibility for the credibility of the program and for it being accomplished. Yes, we'll do an interlocal agreement with PSTA, but I believe the citizens will look to the county to make sure that the money is being spent properly, because while PSTA consists of elected officials and appointed people, we are truly the elected body that's overseeing the tax. So I don't know what kind of oversight we want to put into place, whether we do a joint annual meeting with PSTA to go over the results and make sure that we are hitting all the benchmarks and things are proceeding in the best manner possible. But that's something this board should make a decision about, so that we know that at the end of the day, that everyone's accountable for how this money is being spent and spent properly.
Thank you, Commissioner. Now, again, the first 4 items, Jim, are the ones we need to give you direction on so that we can meet the November 19th date of advertising the public hearing for December 10 public hearing.
That's
The first 4.
Dennis, do we need additional guidance for the ballot question?
Well, I wanted to ask where the oversight piece Commissioner Steele just spoke to, does that fall in number 6, or is that?
5.
Okay.
5. And so it's clear, without Dennis Long, County Attorney's Office, if the uses are limited in the ballot question, then that's all you can spend the money on. You can't spend the money on any other permitted uses in the transportation surtax statute. So constructing the ballot question will flow from the policy decisions made here.
Let me try to walk these down so we can try to get them checked out. On the first one, the rate, I'm sorry,
Can
Commissioner
I
Lovell.
address Commissioner Saley's comments?
Sure, go ahead.
One level of comfort that the public should and I think will have is that the majority of the county commissioners sit on the PSTA board. So that's,
I don't disagree with you, but I still think it needs to come back to the full
Oh,
board, because not all of us are on PSTA, the membership changes from year to year.
I agree.
You know,
But-
I just think I was trying to figure out a mechanism, you know, the school board did the oversight committee, I'm not sure we need that, but I think having an annual joint committee, meeting between the PSTA and the BCC would be a way of accomplishing that oversight.
Absolutely, yeah, I agree, but I think it needs to be said that 4 of us will always be sitting there,
Mhm.
having input in every decision that's made along the way. And then annual meeting report back to the Board of County Commissioners from the PSTA board is, I think, a wonderful way. And there'll be issues that crop up that we may need to address, other zoning and infrastructure things that nobody's thought of yet. And I think that would be almost necessary. Yeah.
I think it was a good process. This is a clean slate, first time through this, so I think that's a good idea. On the rate issue, number 1, everything that we built is based on 1%. So I'm kind of concerned about having up to in there initially. You're right, at the end of that period that we looked at, there may be an opportunity, but I'm just concerned. I think it should be 1%.
But if you have to go back and put it on a ballot or repeal it to change it from 1%, I just see that as a problem.
Well, it's 35 years.
Well, remember we think 50 years down the road
But
for the next
the financial
commissions.
plan is based on 1%, so I have a problem saying up to when we go into 1%. So the plan is, Commissioner Lovell?
We can't even begin to think what the cost will be at that time for ongoing plan. So I don't want to open a can of worms that we can't get the lid back on. The public would probably be very receptive if that were the case and there were excess money to have a ballot language that says it could be used for this, this, and this, and put another list of the, or to repeal it, part of it. But I think it's dangerous at this point to make that assumption. And every penny of that is needed. I mean, it's a very conservative, tight budget to get it done, not knowing what costs are going to be for so many things moving forward.
Thank you, Commissioner Lovell. Commissioner Long?
Yes, I would just like to say for the record that I agree with the reasoning that Commissioner Latvala has spoken to, because in 35, I think it's important to remember the really big picture, that we do have every anticipation and desire that this is going to be a collaborative regional effort. And so 35 years from now, in terms of thinking in a visionary way, I mean, we have every expectation to believe that our transit system will be going into Hillsborough County, going up to Pasco County, going down to Manatee, and that those will be ongoing operation and maintenance costs that we will, want to support for the benefit of our economy and our quality of life here. So more and more, as this becomes successful, people will be getting to rely on these transportation options to go back and forth to work, to travel for recreation, to travel for, anything and everything. So I don't think we should start off putting constraints on what potentially could be out there 35 to 50 years from now.
Thank you. Okay, do we have consensus to go with the 1%?
Yes.
Okay, any opposition to that? Okay, Commissioner Roach?
Yeah, I'm trying to, I almost think, I've been talking about cart before the horse for quite a while on this, and I think almost this list is cart before the horse, because it's, you go down into 6, 5, and all these others that actually could reflect on number 1. So my biggest, I gotta say, and this doesn't place a blame on anybody, I'm really disappointed that we're at such a major fundamental change in this system, and the 11th hour looking at probably what are the most important questions that frankly we should have been talking about well over a year ago. I guess I'm not saying this now, Mr. Chairman, because it's really relative to the rest of them, so instead of repeating it every time, go ahead and make a statement on it so that we can be clear on it. The Special Act was created for the express purpose of creating a funding revenue structure to provide fund busing systems in Pinellas County, that's PSDA. With that came PSDA, the governing body, the accountable body, and the organizational body that's associated directly to that funding structure. If we take away the need for the tax, if you will, the PSDA tax, we don't need the Special Act, and therefore do not need the PSDA operation, and our fold is all underneath the county administrator. This is a county, your point is exactly right. This is a county, Board of County Commissioners tax. The existence, the elimination question, and the use of these words. We can't eliminate this tax without a legislative action. That indeed, perhaps we're going to look at getting the legislature to do that at some point. That's a cart before the horse issue I'm talking about here. Because if we implement this tax and it happened, then legislation does away with the act. They in effect do away with PSDA at the same time. PSDA, the act wasn't created to create the governance of PSDA. The act was created to create a funding model to fund, and then the governance body was created to be accountable for those dollars. We haven't even heard from legislature on this. This is their Special Act. This is their created funding structure, and we haven't heard from them. Where do they stand? Do they intend to fully support this? Do they intend to fully move forward with eliminating that tax dollar? And how does that then carry on to the existence of the governing body and the governing document of PSDA? These are the concerns, a lot of the concerns I'm having on this. Now we're talking about the 1 penny, which is actually a 14% tax increase if you look at the 7-cent taxing structure. But we're also talking about this entire funding system being predicated, this financial plan being predicated on federal and state funding. If that doesn't come through, as we're going to talk later on down here, what do we do? So my point is, a lot of these conversations, we need, in my personal opinion, we need to have been having these for a long time before we get to this point. It's unfortunate that we're not at that point. And I'm not asking you to challenge my opinion. Now,
Well, I would like to ask him.
yeah, about my opinion. I'm talking about a
Listen,
Well,
we've
this
got a
isn't
whole lot to
challenge
get through,
here.
so just go ahead.
This isn't, I'm just trying to, there are a lot of things involved in this action that we really haven't even had discussions with, and everybody at the table. I think the legislature needs to be at the table, and it's because what we do with this directly impacts the existence of the Special Act. It does.
And to that order, I would respectfully ask Mr. Zimmet to address that. I believe the Special Act happened because they were merging the bus systems together and had to create
creating the
future, correct?
Yes, thank you. Alan Zimmet, General Counsel for PSTA. Brief history. Originally, the Central Pinellas Transit Authority was created in the early 1970s. Special Act was originally passed at that time, created the governing body that oversaw the creation of what was then the CPTA, gave them the authority to allow for referendum to obtain that forum authority. That system merged with the St. Petersburg system in the early 1980s. Again, the Special Act was adopted, that created the governing body that allowed them to go out for referendum to the tax. That originally did not pass, and it passed on the second occasion in the early 1980s. So the board was actually created, the governing body existed and was in play and working on that merger before the tax was approved by the voters. I just also want to point out, the Special Act, there's a lot more in the Special Act than just the minimum taxing authority. It creates PSTA, if you repeal, and the swap bill proposed to repeal just that portion of the Special Act that created, that gives the minimum taxing authority to PSTA. There's still other provisions in there that establish not only how the governing body is appointed, but also the authority of that body and the ability of that body to run the system. And I haven't specifically asked Mr. Bennett this, but it's been my opinion that the county commission, as a president with PSTA president listed, does not have the authority to run transit in the PSTA designated area. I don't know if that
We haven't addressed that question one way or another.
in any event, there's a lot more to Special Act than just the element of that.
In the legislation last year or 2 years ago, we just carved out the ad valorem tax. Correct. And left everything else in place. Correct. Look, want to go back to number 1. I think I had 6 folks in favor of having a 1% levy rate. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so you got your direction on that one. Number 2, commencement date, January 2016.
Yes.
Okay.
So,
That's
you might
6 to 1.
on that.
6 to 1. Commissioner Roach will probably be no on all of them.
He will be. No problem.
I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic. Term of levy until repealed. Is that your recommendation, Counselor?
And I've listened to you about your concerns expressed by Commissioner Seal about the need to, at some point in time, retreat from the 1%, if necessary, do a partial repeal, and we'll explore that possibility. But for purposes of directions until repeal is gone.
Everybody on board? Okay.
I just want some flexibility, just in case. I'm not saying we're ever going to go that direction.
Understood. Absolutely. Commissioner Roach, are you okay with until repealed, or are you no on that?
No, but I actually agree with Commissioner Seal on this 100%.
So that's a 6 to 1. And for the uses, I have a question. I'm sorry?
Can I make a statement before you get into your deliberations on this?
Well, I'm going down to number 4.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Okay, go ahead.
In terms of number 4, and it applies to number 6, I believe that, as Brad aptly put it, there are unknown unknowns. And many of those things will be addressed in the interlocal agreement. Now and in the future, the interlocal agreement will be amended because the world changes. And this is a dynamic project, not a static one. That said, I would encourage the board to use language in 4 and 6 that is flexible and broad enough to accommodate a variety of, what would I call them, governmental expenses associated with the project, and that, so that things like the things I mentioned earlier can be adequately addressed in the interlocal agreement at such time as it's necessary, and other things that might come up that, there might be technology we don't even know about today. And so we need to give ourselves that flexibility through the interlocal, where you get specific, but the capacity and capability needs to be vested in the referendum through 4 and 6.
Is 4 related to the interlocal or the ballot?
4 is related to the ballot language. The first initial question is, do you say it's for bus rapid transit, rail, and other things allowed?
Associated.
Well, no, and other things allowed under the statute, or do you truncate it to say, okay, it's only for, and tell me if I'm wrong, it's only for bus rapid transit and rail, and then do you use expansive language to make sure that you cover all of the expenses that might be contemplated under developing those types of systems?
Here's the
And
question.
we can look at, we don't want to put so much language in there that it calls things into question, but we do want to have it broad enough to deal with the host of associated expenditures and the ability to utilize those funds for those things. The interlocal agreement will talk about whether we're going to use those funds for that, but if you don't put some kind of language in there that's expansive to some degree to make sure that you can deal with things like utility relocations or right-of-way acquisitions.
What is the difference? A, C, and D start with the phrase used by the county. And B starts with permitted to an expressway transit or transportation authority. And we're under this assumption of the plan that we are passing along the revenue to PSTA for bus and rail. Which one of those used by the county or remitted to the transit authority?
Just by way of background, this tax started out to be a tax that could only be levied by Miami-Dade and Duval. And as they added and expanded the counties that can levy it, they added uses. Unfortunately, in the drafting process, there was a lot of repetitive language. So while that's an appropriate question, it would probably be B and C uses, and maybe the last use, but we don't have to specify a subsection, in my opinion. If we designate what it's for, in other words, for expanded bus, BRT, and passenger rail, if those are the uses, then we can construct the ballot language, as Jim indicated, restricting it to those uses.
Isn't that what A says? Purposes of development, construction, equipment, maintenance, operations, supportive services, including countywide bus systems?
Well, arguably, that's used by the county. That gets into the issue that Mr. Zimmet touched on about whether it's the PSTA that has exclusive right to provide these transit services or not. Really, it's B.
I don't see fixed guideway in B though.
It's actually in D.
That's correct.
D really sums it up the best for our purposes.
And it can be under subsection D also, but the statute says that any combination of any of these uses, as the county commission deems appropriate, is how the money can be allocated.
That's the one that provides us the most concern.
Commissioner Roach and Commissioner Oswald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is why I thought we ought to have this one first before the others. Because what you're seeing here, the alternative analysis, which is the accepted plan, calling it green light, but the $4 million taxpayer-funded alternative analysis is the accepted plan. It did not have any of these other considerations in it. And that's what dictates the 1 penny increase and your financial structures are based on. The financial analysis are not based on any of these other things that could be part of this, which is part of this discussion that should have happened a long time ago before we came to this point. Because in every one of these, this concept of roads, maintenance of roads and bridges, terms of this nature. Now, we can determine it'll never be done and just, push it over to PSTA and say, handle it within the parameters of the alternative analysis, and that's okay if that's what the direction is. But for the unforeseen unknowns and undeserved circumstances, we're going to be paying that bill. That's why this greater discussion, I think, really needed to start a year ago. If we're looking at that, the alternative analysis does not take into consideration any of these other costs and expense of it. But my point being, if that's what we go with, we must be advised, and as our citizens and taxpayers should be aware of, that if any of these unknowns and unforeseens that come up, who's paying for them?
Well, the language won't have those other projects in it.
But that doesn't stop the projects from happening, just because the language
That's
is.
incorrect. The ballot language will dictate what we will be allowed to spend the money on. So if you say for transit purposes only, basically, it's only for transit purposes. You can't use it on roads and bridges. I was arguing a different direction, but I think that the wishes of PSTA, ACPT, and now the county commission is that this is a transit referendum. That's what you need to
I'm
know.
exactly in concurrence with you because of that exact reason. Now, if we say, yes, it can be used for roads, bridges, and things of that nature, and those additional costs come to fruition, we now impact our solid financial analysis.
Right, and we're not saying that. We're
The
saying
the alternative,
bus and rail.
Okay, so we're saying
Green light analysis, the
Period.
transit system,
But
period.
we're doing that with any discussion on how we intend to fund the rest of these unknowns and what have you, if they come up.
Well, so the alternatives analysis did dictate,
We don't know if it's a rail on the ground or in the air. It's on the ground. What about all the,
Folks, let's have one conversation at a time, please. Let Commissioner Seal and then Commissioner Arnold.
the alternatives analysis dictated a very robust, not only a rail system, but also bus rapid transit, an expanded bus system. I asked for the financial analysis to go back and double check to make sure all of our facts and figures were in good shape. That financial analysis has come back in an excellent way of supporting the entire AA plan. So I think what we need to do is, in moving forward, you can call it the alternatives analysis plan, you can call it the green light analysis plan, but basically it's what's backed up by this financial analysis showing that this is the path that we need to go moving forward.
Thank you.
So that's what I support.
Which is bus service, expanded bus service, and rail. That's what it covers.
Right.
Commissioner
And there will be costs that I think that would be covered in this paragraph D. There's going to be planning, and there may be, trade-offs. We have right-of-way. Well, maybe we need some, instead of selling the right-of-way, you help us with our utility relocation. I mean, I think there's going to be
Give and take.
a lot of give and take in this process where there is right-of-way money budgeted that could be used for, for accomplishing these details.
and it's excellent, point, but we've also learned that solid financial plan was also predicated on the state and federal dollars. What happens if they do not come through? How are we going to plug that gap?
We'll go back the next year and apply again.
I-
Until we get,
The
the STA board will meet and make that decision. You can't, how do we,
Let's get all the comments in. Commissioner Ballot, do you have a comment?
yeah, and Commissioner Seal has moved past it, I think, but I wanted to, she was referring to item D. Including all those, that paragraph is a sure way to kill the referendum.
No,
I just want to make that point. The referendum has to be simple. It has to refer to what we're talking about. Transit, expanded transit, rapid transit, and light rail. And the plan that has been created and is out there for everybody to look at and see. If there's an assumption by anybody that, oh, well, they could spend it on some bridges if they wanted to, it'll fail in a heartbeat. And you've got to be very clear and concise. And I think that's where the conversation went back, but I wanted to emphasize how important it is to keep it clear to the public.
And Mr. Keel made that exact point.
Yes, he did.
It's simple and straightforward.
Yes.
Commissioner Long?
Well, yes, and at the risk of being competitive, I said this at the PSTA board meeting, and I just feel a great urge to say it again. I agree with Commissioner Seal, and I agree with Commissioner Latvala, and I think it's really important for every one of us to remember who we are writing this ballot language for. It's for the voters who are going to be voting on this, and the last thing in the world I want to see in this ballot language is some kind of bait and switch tactic to put all kinds of other stuff in there that, and I'm not an attorney, but in my mind, we could be taken care of in the interlocal agreement process with our municipal partners and private sector partners as well.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner Long.
Might I suggest that you address question 6 first, and then your discussion of question 4 will come alighting soon.
Well, I think we have
Do you agree?
Pretty much said that.
agreed on question 4. What
Okay.
the wording should say we're going to fund Green Light Pinellas, which is the bus system enhancement, and the light rail plan.
Very good. Good job.
And what I heard Commissioner Seal saying, if we can put in language so it's clear that expenses associated with those, we'll try to look at putting that kind of language.
The,
Somewhat.
I mean, it says the copy of the draft language that we got, shall the improvement, operation, and maintenance. Improvement pretty much covers it all.
It's
Operation.
that kind of language
Yeah.
that we would look
Yeah. You can't spell that, you can't have 10 words there, or we'll get in big trouble. Very simple, improvement. We don't know what the technology is going to be in 2018, let alone what it's going to be in 2028. And you have to have the ability to.
I think the draft language does capture the spirit of what we're trying to do.
I think so too.
Alan and Jim can work to get that finalized. Commissioner Seal?
And not to get nitty-gritty, but just, I want to make sure that legally, our staff and Jim feels comfortable that improvement, that this language that's being proposed will cover those expenses that we've been discussing.
That's why we have respected bond counsel to dance on that game for you, and make sure that you're.
I don't want to make it complicated and add all this other,
Right.
whatever, but
And if you have to add planning, then you add that word. So
Are we on the line?
we are on the uses.
uses. I'm referring to what the STA has drafted, which I just want to make sure that
That covers
if
it.
this is something that we're looking at to consider, that it is everything that we desire it to be.
Jim and Bob, you have everything you need on the uses?
I think so.
Funding the bus system, expanded bus, and the light rail system as outlined in GLP. Green light. Everybody on board with that?
Yes.
Okay. That's a 6-1, Commissioner Roach. Okay.
We have different vision in the country, so.
You've been consistent, sir, I respect that. Item 5, direction on sharing proceeds. I'm sorry?
No. Sharing with who?
Well, I thought this would be a pass-through to PSTA, 100%.
My assumption.
Okay. Brad, does that align with the financial plan? Okay. Commissioner Justice?
When we collect taxes, there's, for our general fund, the tax collector takes a piece of that for her expenses. Is that assumed in this plan, that there won't be expenses passed on to one of our constitutionals or us?
It's net of collections, so.
I think that fee's still in.
And the dollars get deposited into a trust fund we would set up for these particular revenues, so it's net of collections.
Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Seal?
But that's a very good point. Dennis, don't go sit down yet. Is it legally required to be the 4%, or is it her actual cost of collecting the taxes?
I believe on ad valorem taxes, it's a fixed percentage.
But on the sales tax, what,
Correct.
would it be the same?
Correct. All the discretion, it's the same for all the discretionary sales tax. It's not the tax collector, it's the Department of Revenue.
Okay. Right. Thank you.
Which is how she sometimes is able to return money to us.
Right.
Right, but that's, again, that's ad valorem taxes and tourist taxes is what are collected locally. The Department of Revenue would collect and remit the sales tax. And it's about, there's about a 3-month delta between when the taxes are collected and when they actually get remitted. So,
Commissioner Roach?
This may be both you and, Dennis, both you and I. On the current special ad valorem structure, there's an opt-out where some cities in this county do not pay. How does that flag here? Are they given an opt-out?
No. This is a countywide tax, and Alan, if you can jump in, feel free. Essentially, the missing cities, the 4 or 5 cities, including Tierra Verde, by the way, which is not included in this, in their service area, they were excluded from the service area because they didn't pay the ad valorem. They will be paying the sales tax, and there is a mechanism in the special act to expand the jurisdictional area for these cities without implicating the ad valorem tax. So there is no opt-out from the sales tax.
in that context? If one of those 4 cities want to opt out, do they have legal challenge to this? And can demand their share?
No, because they're not,
Not
they're not,
possible.
they're not paying the ad valorem.
That it will be paying the sale. I'm saying, within that
They
structure
need
legally, is there,
individuals in the sales tax context, the cities.
but they, is there a legal, I don't know, that's what I'm asking, is there a legal opportunity for those cities who have, before too, opted out of this entire transit discussion, city payment and everything? Because this is specifically that, to exercise their right saying, I want my share to my area to do my things with. They cannot do that. Interesting.
Thank you, Commissioner Roach. We have consensus on 100% pass-through to PSTA.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
do we know specifically who those municipalities are that have opted out?
Yes, we do. St. Pete Beach.
Mr. Zimmett or Brad?
Jeopardy.
Kansas City.
That's not a city.
No, I don't.
It's an unincorporated area.
No. The 5 opt-outs.
Vero Beach.
I just want to maybe correct the word, the use of the term opt-out. Many of those cities never actually had a referendum, so they never had, people never had an opportunity to vote. And that also is what happened in Fairburg, they never actually had an opportunity to vote. I'm not sure I'm going to remember all 5 cities, but it's St. Beach and Treasure Island, both of whom will actually get service by way of an interlocal agreement with PSTA. Kansas City, and then the incorporated area up to Arbery and the unincorporated area of South, what's called the South Sassoon Fire District. They all have never voted. The referendum was never placed in.
Thank you. Thank you. Commissioner Justice?
Thank you. To kind of piggyback on that previous discussion, in the interlocal or in the, I mean, we're talking 100% pass-through, will county have any expenses, whether it's staff time, administrative, any of that, that will be covered by these funds? I mean, will we need one auditor, bookkeeper, or accountant that we have to allot staff time?
Again, we'll have to address that in the interlocal agreement and make sure that the ballot language is sufficient to deal with associated expenses.
Does this fall under the clerk's audit responsibilities for auditing the collection and distribution of sales tax funds?
Under the statute, the clerk is obligated to manage the trust fund and manage the fund. So the department recommends you puts the money into the trust fund that is managed by the clerk.
And so is the clerk paid from that for his oversight?
Are they paid from that?
Or does it come from his general fund funded?
I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know.
That's part of his general fund obligations, obviously, if there were additional expenses associated with that, we could look at that, but I wouldn't think there would be any additional expenses associated with managing the trust fund.
On the number 5, direction of sharing proceeds, 100% pass-through, that was a 6-to-1 vote.
Right.
Okay. And number 6, allocation of financial responsibility for expanded West BRT and passenger rail. The question on this, Bob and Jim, is does PSTA assume 100% of the responsibility? What's the question on this?
Well, the question is, if it's 100% pass-through and the county isn't retaining any dollars to do the system implementation, does that mean that if PSTA needs some assistance in implementation, they're going to turn around and pay money to the county to do those things? And hence PSTA has 100% of all the financial obligations related to expanded bus, BRT, and passenger rail, or do they not? So there again, that's does not have to be decided in the ballot title of the question, but it would be addressed in the agreement. And if the expectation is that the money coming in is financially sufficient to float or whole program, and then the expenses come from PSEA and then they review.
Commissioner Ballot?
And that has been my understanding as a PSTA board member from day one. There's no hidden costs for anybody else. That doesn't mean that some city or the county couldn't decide we want a fancier station than what you're building, or we want another amenity, just like a developer might do. But, and I saw Brad nod his head, so that's been the understanding of the PSTA board from day one. Every single aspect of this is the responsibility of PSTA to pay for. Now, they may contract with the county or with the city of Largo or St. Petersburg to do this or that or the other thing, but it'll be at the expense of PSTA if it's related to bus and rail systems moving forward.
Thank you, that's my understanding as well. Brad, that's your understanding as CEO of PSDA? Okay. Everybody on board with that one? Any questions or comments? Everybody on board? Okay. Commissioner Groves.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you speak to that in terms of liability for being a self-insured county?
PSDA, if you're running the bus system, they're 100% responsible for it. They have liability associated with running the bus system now. They have similar expanded liability associated with BRT and with rail. We are funding it.
That's what it is over it's our tax. We have that disconnected liability once we pass it through.
And we'll make sure in the interlocal agreement.
But does the interlocal agreement supersede law at a federal level? In other words, are we still bound by that as the taxing authority? We're not bound by whatsoever on our passing ballot.
It's no different than the penny for canals with the money that you distribute to the cities. I guess when the city undertakes a project with penny for canals, this county doesn't have liability or risk issue with that project. No.
Sidewalk, if someone trips, it's not our liability.
If we build a sidewalk, but if the city of St. Petersburg builds a sidewalk for penny for canals money, the county doesn't have responsibility, even though the county is the one that issues the, impose that tax.
So we would be liable for those things within the unincorporated area.
As you construct and you're responsible to maintain.
We do.
But if PSTA is operating them and maintaining them, then PSTA has that liability. Some years back, the county charter was, and the special act, was changed to reflect that, to make it very clear that the county is a separate legal entity from PSTA, and PSTA has its own liability. And there's plenty of lawyers that find out where to serve PSTA with those complaints from the buses.
Find out how to sue the county.
And if they make it, send it to Alan.
When Tim gets them, he does.
We have phone books for the express purpose of advertising lawyers, man. Come on, the only reason they're still around. That was my point. Are we clear that someone will find a way? That's all. I'm actually trying to find a way to agree with one of these, so. I actually appreciate it.
We're trying to help you.
Thanks, Alan. On the second one, is the county responsible for any costs to identify sources of funding? The second bullet, number 6.
With the cost associated with the provision of bus, BRT, and passenger rail, there will not be any costs.
Okay, so if the authorized transportation facility is not complete because of the changes in technological or unforeseen circumstances, should funds be used for other lawful purposes, or should we levy be repealed? My point being is if those federal fundings do not come through, and I'll make the assumption, I don't think they're coming because the country's broke and we're about 28 on that list, and we can't even ask for that money until we pass the tax. Then, and I'm not speaking that class, but FDA/rail 2012, and it'll show you that structure. So if that funding does not come, what do we do? Are we just saying, PSDA, let us know what you want to do?
Well, that's why we talked about, Commissioner Seeley was raising the issue of repeal. We would try to create some flexibility in that repeal language so that if they had to do partial repeal, we could do that.
My point of doing that is if you are going to discard the ad valorem tax forever, you have to leave some flexibility in there for unforeseen future circumstances.
But
or repealing part of it, or keeping it, or whatever.
that was my point, it's almost up, it's the up to issue or up to and over, because again, if the current financial structure is predicated on, as Brad confirmed, these additional funding sources coming in, and that's set at 1 penny. If it does not come, what is the move for funding that gap?
Which is,
Because the penny structured just on it.
I believe the staff has already been given direction to look for the proper language to reflect exactly what you're talking about. So I think we can move on.
Well, I'm not necessarily looking forward. I understand the direction of it. This is the discussion. What is that next move? Is the move going to be, we're not building rail, repeal the tax?
Well, again, we covered this quite extensively at the PSTA meeting last week. I don't want to rehash everything that's in the plan. But you don't get the federal funding if you don't have a local funding source. So that's why we're moving forward with it. Plus, you can build reserves, and there's financial projections that shows the projected revenues, what you need for the bus, what you need for the rail. If down the line we don't get federal funding, the rail won't happen. But you will not get the rail funding from the Fed if you don't have a local funding source.
You're not able to apply for it if you don't have it.
So
There's no guarantee of it coming, that's my
I
point.
want to try to wrap this up. I think we've answered all the questions. Commissioner Roach, I know where you are on this issue. Jim, you've got direction on everything you need?
Got what you need?
Bob, you've got everything you need in terms of direction? Okay, thank you all. This was a lot of work went into making this day happen. I want to thank everyone that came. Mr. Chairman, Dr. Good to see you again.
Is that the last piece of direction? Are we using this or we're coming back to some other?
That is draft language from PSTA. Jim will work to bring us back draft language, but we're on target for November 19th. Set the public hearing. Thank you all. The next item, Mr. Administrator, is contract administration.